It's 70 AD. The Roman Empire is at war. Following the downfall of the tyrant Nero, just a handful of months have passed since 4 powerful generals vied for control of the capital and the position of emperor itself. In the wake of this political instability, following the demise of Rome's first imperial dynasty, far-off client states, opportunistic power players, and subjugated people alike seized the opportunity to strike out for themselves. From the forests of Germany to the deserts of Africa, battles had raged, allegiances shifted. But none of these conflicts was as far-reaching and as all-encompassing as that which played out in the Holy Land, the recently provincialized client state of Judea, homeland of the Jews. 4 years earlier, this latest addition to the empire had exploded into rebellion, the likes of which had not been seen in the region for decades. For this is the age of the Bible, and messianic millenarian fever has gripped the land. With candidate after candidate harking back to the time of independence by claiming the revered title King of the Jews, with the aim of throwing off the shackles of Roman rule. Charismatic bandit leader called Hezekiah had been one. Mysterious rebels known simply as the Samaritan and the Egyptian were others. But each of these messiahs had failed, mostly ending up nailed to a cross. For 4 years, one of the great cities in the East, the most celebrated of all according to the writer Pliny the Elder, had been self-governed by the Jews once more. But, of course, by 70 AD, a reckoning was on the way. When the Roman general Titus arrived outside the city walls that summer, he was presented with a horrific sight. Astride 2 holy mountains, resplendent with vast palaces and public buildings, mostly the work of the pro-Roman client king Herod, who had ruled a generation earlier. The multi-walled city had already thrived for 1,000 years, since the days of Solomon and David of old. But now, as many as 500,000 Jews, Tacitus says 600,000, hemmed in on all sides, suffered and starved in unimaginably horrendous conditions. After 4 years of self-rule, 3 vying warlords now held separate quarters of the city. Some of them die-hard religious fanatics, others opportunistic bandits, and yet more innocents swept up in the carnage. Titus, marching at the head of 60,000 legionaries, as well as all manner of local Syrian auxiliaries, eager for war against the Jews, had been left in command of his father's army when he'd headed to Rome to pursue his claim on the imperial throne. Vespasian, a veteran commander who'd seen service all over the known world, had been successful with that claim. The first non-Julio Claudian to hold the imperial title. Yet, there was still much work to be done. And above all else, Jews needed to be made an example of. Generally respectful of ancient religions, no other peoples in the empire had been given the same freedom of religion and rights as the Jews. Given free rein to carry on with their religious practices, in return for a perfunctory yearly sacrifice in honour of the emperor. And yet, since Herod's death, they'd been nothing but a thorn in the Roman side. Amongst Titus's entourage stood the Romano-Jewish historian Josephus, a former rebel himself who'd realised the ultimate futility of resistance against Rome. From whom we get much of our knowledge of the events to come. In Josephus's account, Titus is painted as a conflicted character, generally seeking to lessen the worst of the violence. He still had to end the war. And there was only one way that he knew how. Fear. By mid-July, 500 prisoners were being crucified every single day. The hills around the city were covered by their splayed corpses. And yet more bodies filled the streets, rotting in the midday sun. The result of Jewish infighting as much as Roman attack. According to Josephus, who puts the figure taking refuge inside the city at 1 million, as many as 24 Jewish sects already violently struggled over the capital and access to food. Tens of thousands starved. Finally, by late July, after 4 months of siege, Titus gave the orders to attack. Focusing on the very heart of the city and Judaism itself, the Temple Mount, where the most die-hard rebels held out. Though he'd sought above all else to preserve that most holy site in all of Judaism, an orgy of violence followed, the scale and severity of which has rarely been matched in history. According to the Roman sources, tens of thousands were not only massacred, but suffered ignominious, violent ends. Hearing rumours of some of the wealthier Jews having swallowed their riches, some of the Syrian auxiliaries allegedly cut open their bellies while they lived to retrieve the gold within. And finally, as the rebels continued to fight with no end in sight, Titus gave orders for the Holy Temple to be set ablaze. The highest point in all Jerusalem, the only official temple in all the land. For the Jews, the sole place where God had been communed with for 1,000 years, where all sacrifices were made. The place was burned to the ground. Within hours, as the blaze raged out of hand in the heat of the day, the very place where the physical and the divine met, as far as the Jews were concerned, said to have once housed the Ark of the Covenant, the holy chest which contained the 10 Commandments handed down to Moses, and the only temple in all of mainstream Judaism, the very place where God existed on earth, was reduced to rubble and ruins. Just one wall survives today. Josephus tells us the destruction was so severe that nothing was left of the city that could have reminded that it had once been there at all. The Jewish people had been shattered. During the war, hundreds of thousands had already been slaughtered, and more would follow. Countless others marched out of the city in chains. According to the historian Eusebius, Vespasian ordered every descendant of the royal line of David to be hunted down. The royal line, also traditionally holding the title of high priest, was to be exterminated. In the aftermath, the surviving religious elders, seeking no such disaster to ever befall their people again, altered the very teachings of their faith to take on more pacifist leanings, permanently altered by the brutality of the sack. With the focus of veneration shifting from the now destroyed temple to the home of the individual, and specifically, the holy book of the Torah. Finally, by the 2nd century AD, becoming the rabbinic Judaism we know today. Its brother religion, Christianity, also branching off as a result. At the very culmination of hundreds of years of millenarian, messianic fever in the Holy Land, the end of the world had come. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds against them, one last sect continued to hold out in the deserts to the south of the great city for years to come.